Hi everyone, this is Destiny from Confessions of a Former Healthcare Worker. And today I'm going to talk briefly about what it was like working in a hospital. Um, I know I had like a few people say that didn't find working in home health care that interesting. However, I will tell you that by far, aside from being a news reporter, which I loved, um, working in a hospital is where I learned the most. I really learned a great deal when I was a PCA, personal care assistant, sometimes called a personal care tech, fancy term for nurses aide. I mean, I consider nurses aide. Um, you're basically working under nurses. But you're also working with nurses as well. So how I became a PCA was that I saw an ad on Indeed.com advertising that they were going to be starting classes. And they wanted people that mainly had experience, but when I attended the class, I found that there were some people that didn't have any experience, but it did help having that personal care and home health experience as well as experience working in a nursing home because those were very important. The class was a week long class. It was very an intensive training, and I remember going to the interview and immediately getting hired um, to take the class. That is, and I attended the class, and we were basically, aside from having to learn about the importance of first aid and CPR, we were told that we would be learning how to take blood pressure and basically getting on hand experience. When I say on hand, I mean I actually we had to work the floors, not really kind of basically shadow somebody, but we were on the floors by the end of the week. And I remember being, kind of intimidated at first. Um, being a little scared because I was out of my element. I'd never worked in a hospital before. I wasn't used to doing that kind of patient care. I was always used to either my mother being a patient or being a patient myself. So to take care of these certain patients, it was going to be a challenge. So we had to do like it was kind of like a schooling. We went early in the morning. We were there for 8 hours. We did get paid to attend the class. And when we passed the class, we were told that we would get a job because they were desperately looking for PCAs. I was there with people from different ages, from 19 on up to around my age or a little bit older, and we were told that we were going to have to wear like gray scrubs, and we were going to have to bring a notebook. You really did need a notebook because they went over a lot. And I remember just, them handing out badges that we had to wear saying that we were PCA students and kind of feeling a little important. Um, when I went into the cafeteria where all the doctors and nurses were, and then we were taught how to take manual blood pressures, which I'm not going to lie, I am not good at taking manual blood pressure. I kept having trouble hearing because I've always had trouble with my hearing. Um, I had trouble kind of hearing at times, but I was able to hear enough where I was able to get accurate blood pressures. we were also told that we would be getting, um, on the job training as well, which we did. We did basically get on the job training. That is where I learned how to remove IVs. I learned how to do bladder scans and basically learned to assist even with removing catheters. So there was a great deal that we had to learn. It was a little bit nerve-wracking at times. I I found myself questioning whether I was making the right decision. Could I handle it? Could I handle somebody possibly dying or coding? But I stuck through it, and I did, make friends. Uh, Unfortunately, once we got into that world, not a lot of people stayed. A lot of people left because it was a lot and some things that we weren't told about. One thing that I was really upset about, um, that I wasn't told about was that I was going to be having to work one on one with combative patients. I, who grew up in an abusive environment, um, and who dealt with abusive exes, I had no idea that I was going to have to sit one on one with patients who were going to scare the hell out of me. There were patients who I I mean, one patient couldn't help it. They were mentally at the level of a 3-year-old, so they had no idea. They lived in a group home. They had no idea what they were doing or how they were behaving, because they didn't, you know I don't like using mental retardation. I know I'm probably butchering the sound of that. I don't like that word, but they were, mentally at a 2, 3-year-old level. I also worked with people that were coming out of, drugs. One woman was coming out, she was, an alcoholic, and she was, brought in by loved ones, and she was very, very nasty until, they gave her something to sedate her. Many of these patients, were sedated. They had to be. Some of them, I wanted them to be sedated because they were that scary, because I had only worked with, maybe 2 people with dementia. So I was unaware of how really violent they could be. Ones with dementia and Alzheimer's, they, could be very, very violent. So I was slapped, I was hit, I was punched, I was almost strangled. Um, it was a very scary situation that I will elaborate on later on. So the PCA class, we were told that if we made it and we passed the class, we would be interviewing with the managers of the different departments. But first we had to choose 3, like, it was either 2 or 3 floors that we wanted to shadow on. We kinda wanted to basically work as a team with the PCA that was working the floor, and I remember choosing the ICU was my first choice. Um, the 2nd floor, which I totally forget at the moment what it was called. I think it was the progressive care unit. I just always remembered it as the 2nd floor that I dreaded the most. And, also, like, med surg. There was one opening. There was only one opening in the maternity department, and I love babies. I mean, my baby, of course, he's 18 years old now. So he's not no matter how old he gets, he's always going to be my baby, but I really did, express an interest with maternity. However, I found out that I had a lot of competition for that position. So, I chose the other 3. The ICU, there's basically, 12 to 14 beds, and there was one PCA, and I swear I'd never seen anyone move so fast. I mean, this girl, she wasn't the type that sat down and played on her phone. I mean, she was constantly moving and really doing patient care and really showing me what to do, how to do full bed changes, how to clean up patients, and, basically how to work with, patients who were on ventilators. And, that's actually the floor where I first witnessed an actual death. Um, but that came later on as I was training. Um, that was something that will never forget, watching that take place. So then, like, the second floor, I went around there was another girl with me. We shadowed the PCA, and she taught us how to take vitals. We used what was called Dynamaps, which I think every doctor's office should have. For me, it was a lot easier than doing manual blood pressure. Dynamaps, they took your blood pressure, they took your temperature, and your respirations. So we followed her around. We learned how to empty fully catheters and how to measure like urine and urinals. You had to document everything. Urine outputs, stool, output. So, she was very nice and she was very knowledgeable. And then we went to the med surg floor, and that's basically, was the main floor where people who had surgeries were put. And it was there that I learned how to take like blood vitals, because they have to be taken every so many minutes, every 15 minutes or so. You have to go in and take vitals, and because they're being hooked up to different bags of blood. So on every floor, I definitely learned something, and I came out feeling confident. So by the end of the week, I was told that I passed, and then the interview process basically consisted of so many of us going in. They had managers from like ICU, progressive care unit, med surg, rehab, behavioral health, maternity. They had managers from those departments, and you basically went to whichever table you wanted to interview for. And one of the main positions that they were looking for was somebody to work in the float pool. They had a lot of openings for that. And that is one I chose because at the time I knew that this other girl did an excellent job interviewing for the maternity position, and I had a feeling she was gonna get it. She was a mother of like 4 or 5 kids, and she had experience. So I mainly interviewed for the float pool. I got hired for the float pool, and I figured, okay, you'd basically have experience working in every department. So I knew that though I had never chose like to shadow at the rehab or behavioral health. I knew that at some point being in a float pool, I was going to be having to work in those departments, which I did. And the thing that you don't know is that basically when you come in the morning for the float pool, you have to call in like the nursing supervisor. She's like the main supervisor over everything that goes on during the night on the floors. You basically had to call in and they would tell you where you were going to be that day. But I remember during the orientation period, we were told that we would be shadowing in different departments on different days. We mainly start out the day shift, which was 6 a.m. to 6:30 p.m., if I'm remembering correctly. And we would work the day shift for so many weeks, and then they would change you to night shift. Night shift was a killer for me, and I deal with severe insomnia. But it was hard getting used to working 6 at night to 6:30 in the morning, having to stay up, trying to keep yourself from falling asleep. For me, I also have ADHD, so it was hard for me to stay sitting, whereas many of the girls that worked as PCAs were going to nursing school to be an RN. So they would sit and they would do their nursing studies, and I would have to keep checking on the patients. But yeah, I passed class, and the first few days of my orientation, aside from having to do orientation at the one main building during the day from like 8 to 4, which was so boring. It was a couple days, like 3 days or 2 or 3 days, and it was really super boring. I actually started to fall asleep when I had to do my last orientation for the hospital, because it's a lot. But, I remember after you did the orientation, you had to go over until it was time for them to give reports, because when 6 o'clock came around, you had to give report on to whoever was coming on after you. So, and a lot of times, you had to give report to 1 or 2 different PCAs, because each floor had each floor, mainly like the second and third floor, they had 3 PCAs, or they tried to. We were short-staffed many times. That's why they needed people for the float pool. So that was a big challenge right there, and that was something that we were told about in class, that yes, you were gonna have to learn to document everything or else it didn't happen. And you were going to have to really learn how to do medical charting, which I definitely learned a lot from doing medical charting. And I learned a lot about patient care. But that was the class. It was a week long. Like I said, got paid. You had to buy your own uniforms, which, I had been working as a home health aide, doing home health until my patient passed away. Anyways, so I'd saved up to get those scrubs. But yes, when it came to actually working on the floors and for more than just a day, working on some of those floors for a couple days, because you worked 3/12s. So, I mean, while that was a big plus because you got you had to just work 3 days and then you got the rest of the days off, it also screwed up your sleep cycle and it I'm gonna get into that in another video of just how hard that really was working 3/12s. But I basically wanted to talk about, the PCA class. Um, right now, I know that they have medical assistant classes that is very similar to the PCA, but is also different. Being a medical assistant is you learn a lot more. I mean, you actually go into if you're working in doctor's offices, you actually room patients, and if there's no nurse available, you're the one that has to take their blood pressure and their vitals. So I know a lot of people who have either went to the PCA class or went to the medical assistant class. But yeah, I'll explore more later on about what it was like working in a hospital because it was very eye-opening and it was a job that kind of drove me to kind of a breaking point, and it really did end up affecting my mental health in a not so good way. Um, I will say it affected my health in a very bad way, because there's a lot of things they don't tell you. There's a lot of things that I ended up learning hands-on and firsthand, and a lot of things I witnessed that, um, ended up giving me some PTSD. But I just mainly wanted to do this video to talk about the PCA class. For anyone who's interested, it is a class that teaches you a great deal. I did have 2 very great teachers. Both of them were RNs. They were excellent. They did an excellent job teaching. And yeah, I made friends, but at the same time, those friends quickly moved on because they knew it was the bad decision. Um, I kept hanging in there because I had plans of becoming a registered nurse. However, I was badly injured and I can't ever pursue that. So that is why I'm doing these podcasts to kind of educate people on the world of healthcare. I know sometimes it seems a little boring, but if you really knew what goes on, what it's like doing direct patient care, if you knew what it's like to work in a doctor's office in that fast-paced world, or doing home health care where you get to know somebody and then they pass away, or, you know, their insurance company won't pay for services anymore and you have to say goodbye to that person. It's very hard. It's very difficult, and especially if you're caring for a loved one. Um, I have a friend who just lost her grandmother who she cared for, and I know that's one thing that I feared and why I don't do personal care for my mother is because she has Parkinson's very badly, and she's been fighting getting radiation for, nodules on her thyroid, and I guess I have that fear. I've watched so many people pass away that, I don't wanna be there if, God forbid, I would lose my mother. So that's one of the reasons why I have kind of backed away, and I've kind of instead of working in healthcare, I would rather do these podcasts to educate people on healthcare and what goes on so that you have more of an understanding. So when you're in a doctor's office and you're staying there for 1, 2 hours, you understand kind of why, and what's going on. So I hope you enjoy this video. I hope you learned something from it. As I said, I intend to keep going. I'm gonna talk a lot more about working in the hospital and what it was like working at the behavioral health unit, which was the psych ward. I worked there, the adult and kids unit, and that was a big eye-opening experience as well. And I will explore that later on. So I hope you enjoyed this. And this is Destiny saying, see you later.